We have a profoundly important announcement to make, which is the most epic chip-building exercise in history. By far, this will really take things to another level, so it's a level that people probably aren't even considering right now. That's not in the... I would call this a kind of context mismatch problem. It's outside their frame of reference, so let's adjust the context here by a few orders of magnitude. It's a joint effort. I'm pressing the button, but the button isn't working. We aspire to be a galactic civilization. So, I think the future, which everyone, well, most people I think would agree is the most exciting, it's the one where we're out there, among the stars, where we're not forever confined to just one planet, where we become a multi-planetary species. Like in the best science fiction you've ever read. You know, Star Trek or Iain Banks or Asimov or Heinlein. And we want to make this real, not just fiction, to turn science fiction into scientific fact. This is the glorious and exciting future that I certainly look forward to. And it's also very worthwhile to consider, for example, how you would classify civilizations. You know, there is a way. So, there was a physicist, I think he was Russian, in the 60s, Kardashev. He thought in broad terms about how you would assess a given civilization. And he said, well, if you're a Type 1 civilization, you're using most of your planet's energy, and we still have a long way to go to actually become a Type 1 civilization. We still use only a tiny fraction of the sun's energy that reaches our planet. Let's look at this. There it is, but yeah. The Earth receives only about 0.5 billionth of the sun's energy, so the sun is really huge. The sun represents 99.8% of the entire mass of the solar system. So sometimes people ask me, like, what about, other energy sources on Earth, like fusion here on Earth? Well, that's unfortunately very small, because the sun makes up 99.8% of the mass of the system, and Jupiter is about 0.1%. And the Earth is in the other category, that's us. I think it was Carl Sagan. I think he might have said that. The Earth is like a tiny speck of dust in a vast darkness. Very, very small. The sun is absolutely gigantic. Therefore, the only viable way to truly expand civilization is to expand energy generation in space. So this is necessarily an absolute truth, because na Terra, capturamos apenas uma fração da energia do Sol, pois somos pequeno grão de poeira. The way to think about this is more or less like electricity production. On Earth, de toda a energia, civilization uses only about 1 trillionth of the energy, energia do Sol, o que significa que, mesmo se você aumentasse a produção de energia da civilização em 1 milhão de vezes, ainda seria apenas 1 milionésimo da energia do Sol. Quero dizer, é tão inspirador pensar nisso. Since we're so small in the grand scheme of things. And yes, many times we end up getting involved in these little disputes here on Earth, which are actually pretty small things. When you really consider the vastness of the universe, that's why I think it's really important to consider the vastness of the universe, and what we can do is something much greater than anything we've ever done before. Instead of worrying about these little disputes here on Earth, I don't see much point in that. Yes, we want to be a civilization that expands throughout the galaxy, with spaceships where anyone can go wherever they want. That would be epic. And have a city on the moon, cities on Mars, populate the solar system, and send spaceships to other star systems. That seems like the best possible future. So to do that, we need to harness the power of the sun. So, a Terrafactory, although it's huge, a terawatt of computing per year is enormous by our civilizational standards. It still is. Just a step along the way, to even be a Kardashev. There's still a long way to go to become a Kardashev level 2 civilization, and you don't even register as a level 3 civilization. So, it's something very big by current human standards, but still small in the grand scheme of things. And that's extremely difficult even for all human beings. Therefore, to achieve such a difficult goal, it really requires a joint effort from the entire species. SpaceX, Shay, and Tesla working together to create this epic Terrafactory project. And Tesla, Shay, and SpaceX have already accomplished truly incredible things that people didn't think would be possible. So, here at the Giga Texas factory, you know, the Optimus robot that's being built, there's a global network of superchargers. There's really a lot going on. And it wasn't that long ago that people thought electric cars wouldn't amount to anything, and basically, there were no electric cars for sale when Tesla started. And people said it was impossible, and now Tesla is producing 2 million electric cars a year. Yes, and then, Zai, even though it's a new company and now part of SpaceX, also built the first gigawatt-scale computing cluster, which in real time is a record. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA said he had never seen anything built so fast in his entire life. So, a big compliment from NVIDIA and then SpaceX. Well, I think you can read it for yourself. Well, you already know. I mean, reusable rockets. People used to say reusable rockets weren't possible, and even if they were, they wouldn't be economically viable. So we did it, and then made it economically viable, and now we've already landed more than 500 vezes. And now, after that, we had the Falcon Heavy, and now we're working on Starship, and Starship is a critical piece of the puzzle. Because to scale computing and energy, you need to go to space, which means you need a massive payload to space. And Starship will make that possible. So that gives you a sense of scale. We have Optimus there, Optimus to give you a sense of scale, and Optimus is about 1.8 meters tall. So that gives you an idea of the size of the rocket. Starship V3. The Starship version 4 will be much longer, actually. Starship version 4 will make Starship version 3 look kind of short. So we are going to expand with Starship V3 to 200 tons of payload in orbit, up from 100 tons with V3. And then you can see that this is just a rough approximation of the mini version of ISAT, so this is about 100 kilobar. It's showing the solar panels and the radiator to scale. So for some reason, there's been a strange debate about radiators in space. It's safe to say that SpaceX knows how to do heat rejection in space, with 10,000 satellites in orbit. Maybe they know a thing or two. So, you can see that the radiator is actually quite small compared to the solar panels. And we call this a mini satellite, since it's only 100 kilobar. We expect that future satellites will probably reach the megawatt range. That way, to reach the terawatts required for total computing capacity per year, you need about 10 million tons in orbit per year, and at 100 kilobar per ton. So, we're confident that this is feasible. There's no need for any new physics or impossible things to get there. Therefore, I'm really confident that SpaceX will be able to put 10 million tons into orbit per year. So, we're moving towards 1 terawatt of solar power, which solves, well, it's going to solve the power generation problem. Therefore, the essential missing ingredient is, without a doubt, 1 terawatt of computational power. This announcement is aimed at solving that. O principal problema que faltava. So that you can get a much clearer idea of the magnitude of what we're talking about now. The current global production of infrastructure for AI computing is about 20 gigawatts each year. This chart explains why we need to build Terrafactory, because all the rest of the Earth's production represents about 2% of what we need. So, if we add up all the existing factories in the world today, they represent only about 2% of what we actually need for the terawatt project or Terrafactory. Therefore, we definitely want our current supply chain to be very well defined. We are immensely grateful to our current supply chain, including Samsung, TSMC, Micron, and other important partners. And we would like them to expand production of the chips they produce as quickly as possible. I said exactly those words to them. But there is a maximum rate at which they feel comfortable expanding. However, that rate is lower than we would like. So either we build Terrafactory or we won't have access to the chips, and since we really need the chips, we're going to build Terrafactory. And we're starting with an advanced technology factory here in Austin. And I believe Governor Abbott is in the audience. I'd like to thank Governor Abbott and the state of Texas for their support. So, in the advanced technology factory, we will have all the equipment necessary to manufacture any type of chip, whether it's logic or memory. And we will also have all the equipment necessary to produce lithography masks. So in a single building, we can create a lithography mask. Manufacture the chip, test the chip, make another mask, and have an incredibly fast and recursive cycle to improve the chip design. As far as I know, this doesn't exist anywhere else in the world where you have everything necessary to manufacture logic, memory, do the packaging, and test everything. And then make the masks, improve the masks, and keep repeating the same cycle over and over. So, we're not just going to do conventional computing here. I think there are some very interesting new physics, which potentially actually I'm confident will work. It's just a matter of when. So, we're really going to push the limits of physics in computing to the extreme, and we're going to try a lot of crazy and bold things. What can you do if you have this fast iteration cycle? I can't emphasize enough the importance of being able to manufacture a chip, test it, then change the design, make another one, and have all of that in a single building. I believe that our recursive improvement in this situation is probably an order of magnitude much higher than anything else in the world. So, in general, we expect to manufacture two types of chips. One will be optimized for AD and inference, so this one will be used mainly in Optimus and in the cars, but especially in Optimus. Because I expect that robots, humanoid robots, will be produced at 10 to 100 times the volume of cars. So, if vehicle production on Earth is about 100 million vehicles per year, humanoid robots, that's between 1 billion and 10 billion units per year. So that's a lot. So yes, Tesla intends to manufacture a very significant percentage of those. That's our goal. And then we need a very high-power processing chip, one that's specially designed for space. That takes into account the very hostile and challenging environment of space, where you have high power, high-energy ions, photons, and constant electron buildup. It's a hostile environment in space. So, you want to design the chip, you want to optimize it for space, and you also generally want to operate it a little hotter than you normally would on Earth, to minimize the radiator mass. So, there are several constraints that make you design something differently for space than you would for ground use. And for space processing, I think that will be the vast majority of the processing because you have energy constraints on Earth. So I believe it's probably around 100 to 200 gigawatts per year of terrestrial chips, and probably on the order of a terawatt of chips in space. Simply because of the power constraints on the ground, yeah, that's probably how it's going to end up. Space has this advantage that it's always sunny. That's really good. So I really am convinced that the cost of AI and deploying AI in space will become significantly lower than the cost of terrestrial AI. In a much shorter period of time than most people expect, I believe it could take as little as 2 or 3 years until it's actually cheaper to send AI chips to space than to use them on Earth. Because in space you don't need much in terms of batteries, since it's always sunny. And solar energy, you'll get at least 5 times or more solar energy in space compared to Earth. Because there's no atmospheric attenuation, no day-night cycle or seasonality. And you're always perpendicular to the sun, so you're really maximizing solar energy at that point. And actually, space solar power costs less than terrestrial solar power, because you don't need heavy glass or structures to protect it from weather events. So, as soon as the cost to put something into orbit drops to a low value, it immediately makes a lot of sense. Putting AI in space basically becomes an obvious decision. Also, as you go into space, you get increasing economies of scale and things get easier over time. Whereas, when you try to put more and more energy on the ground, you run out of space and start using the easiest places. And then you face even more NIMBY opposition. No one wants that in their backyard. So actually, increasing power generation on Earth gets harder and more expensive over time, but in space it actually gets cheaper and easier over time. Those are very important points. What you just saw there was because, of course, you're wondering, well, what do you do after a terafab? Don't think small. Yes, that's a very important point. So, we know, how do you manage to reach the 1 petawatt mark? That naturally ends up being the next obvious question to ask. And the idea is that you can get there by having an electromagnetic mass launcher on the moon, with advanced robots, with Optimi, and obviously NASA. De quantidade de seres humanos. So, you can create the ability to send a petawatt, you can create a petawatt of computing capacity and send that into deep space. Because on the moon doesn't have an atmosphere and has 1/6 of Earth's gravity, so you don't need rockets on the moon. You can literally accelerate it to escape velocity from the surface. And that drastically reduces the cost, once again, of being able to take advantage of renewable energy. And it makes it possible for humanity to go more than 1,000 times beyond 1 terawatt. Therefore, given that, for sure, in the future, I just want to live long enough to see the mass launcher on the moon, because that's going to be incredibly epic. That would take us to 1/1,000,000th of the sun's energy. At least it's something that makes us humble when we think about it. 1/1,000,000th of the sun's energy is worth 1,000,000 Earth economies, which is great from that perspective. And from that point on, yes, you start to expand far beyond that, to the planets, to other distant stars, and you create the most exciting future possible that I can even imagine. That reminds me a bit of the opening of Idiocracy by Mike Judge, revealing an era of incredible abundance. Yes, absolutely. The elements of this process are sustainable energy, space travel, artificial intelligence, and robotics. This brings incredible abundance to everyone. And, in fact, the only path to your extraordinary abundance is AI and robotics. That doesn't mean it can't go wrong. I hope it does, you know? But I think it will probably all work out, and it will be a future you'll love. It's the best future I can imagine. At least we'll go beyond the moon and Mars, sailing through the rings of Saturn. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could buy a trip to Saturn? Or honestly, if you just took a trip to Saturn? I think things will just be free in the future. It sounds crazy, but you know, if you have an AI and robotics economy that's something like 1,000,000 times the size of the current Earth's economy, literally any need you can imagine could be met. If you can imagine it, you can have it. So, I think Ian Banks, in his culture books, is pretty much right in saying that actually there won't be money in the future and there will be abundance for everyone. If you can imagine it, you can have it. That's it. That means anyone could travel to Saturn, not just a few. If you want to, you can go, yes. Join us on this journey. And oh, help us design amazing chips and manufacture amazing chips. And help us build a terawatt of chips. A terawatt of solar power, 10 million tons in orbit per year, thank you.